Rejoice, episode 176, Millie and Moustaches. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. We're firmly in Leopold Bloom's kitchen at number 7 Eccles Street in Dublin in June 1904. He's been out to the butcher's this Thursday morning, and he has started to cook the kidney that he bought. He's also delivered the morning's letters to his wife, and now he's getting ready to take breakfast to her in bed. And while he's doing all that, he's looking at his half of the correspondence from his daughter Millie down in Mullingar. Here's this week's text. Then he slit open his letter, glancing down the page and over. Thanks, Newtown, Mr. Coughlin, Loch Owl picnic, young student. Blazes Boylan's seaside girls. The tea was drawn. He filled his own moustache cup. Sham Crown Derby, smiling. Silly Millie's birthday gift. Only 5 she was then. No, wait, 4. End of excerpt. Fairly straightforward, yes? Haha, no. Some obscurities in there, and some wonderful buried treasure. Mr. Bloom opens the letter, and his eyes scan it. Millie sends thanks for the new tam, the new beret, tam o'shanter, a young lady's fashion item of the day. She refers to Mr. Coughlin, and perhaps he, her boss in the photographic shop, has admired the new beret, and a young student has evidently invited her on a picnic out to a lake shore. Well, we know that he has, and we even know his name, Alec Bannon. And how do we know? Because a young man clinging to a spur of rock in the 40-foot bathing place in Chapter 1, remember him? He was moving slowly frog-wise, his green legs in the deep jelly of the water. He tells Buck Mulligan that his brother is staying with a family name of Bannon down in Westmeath, and one of the Bannons has found a sweet young thing down there, photogirl he calls her. Well, that's Millie Bloom. And that's how Joyce delivers subtle continuity, vital in the substructure of any novel. The picnic is on the shore of Loch Owl. Ireland has a glittering centrepiece of lakes, Loch Dervara, Loch Ennell, Loch Owl. Dean Swift's Lilliput of Gulliver's Travels is set down there. Great fishing, by the way. And here comes Joyce's brilliant technique of seemingly dissociated thought, as Mr. Bloom thinks, Blazes Boylan's Seaside Girls. Here's what's in there. There's a song routine in one of Boylan's stage shows, a music hall ditty, Seaside Girls, made famous by the famous Vesta Tilley. And it has lines such as, those girls, those lovely seaside girls, all dimples, smiles, and curls, your head it simply whirls. That's Millie, as she must be at this teenage stage of her life, not by the sea, by the lake. But it's Boylan's show, and Boylan is Millie's mother's lover. So look at the complexity Joyce packs into that 4-word-long thought. Blazes Boylan's Seaside Girls. There's more to that in a moment. Next, the tea was drawn. He filled his own moustache cup. Sham Crown Derby or Derby, smiling. Mr. Bloom calculates that the tea is ready to be drunk, to his taste anyway, so he fills his cup. Now, what's a moustache cup? This is nice. It's a fact, and if you want it to be, as ever with Joyce, it's also a metaphor. Let me deal with the phrase Sham Crown Derby first. Imitation, sham, interesting word, 4 centuries old at least. Sham means false, fake, counterfeit, and it comes from, wait for it, shame. As in, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. The word shame is old Northern European, old High German, Beowulf stuff, 700 to 800 Anno Domini. Crown Derby was a China. It is a China. And it's called Crown Derby because it had a crown on it, because it had a royal approval and patent. And Mr. Bloom is therefore drinking from Sham Crown Derby, a cheap reproduction. Now, back to Moustache Cup. And my mother's uncle, P.J. Ryan, my grandmother's brother, had a moustache cup. His was perfectly plain, but some had decorations, including humorous pictures of moustaches. All of them had this in common. They have a lip somewhere inside, perhaps all around the inner perimeter of the cup, with an aperture through which tea or any hot beverage can be sipped. Today's cool, tall cups, the metal ones, aren't dissimilar with their little flange for sipping through. And the reason for this lip was to stop gentlemen's moustaches getting too wet or too hot. Because if you had waxed your moustache, as many men did, my great uncle didn't, at least not when I knew him, and the hot tea got into the moustache, the wax melted and drifted down into your tea. Not nice. Next thoughts of Mr. Bloom. Let me look at it. Oh yes, I want to pick up another interesting reference here, Homeric this time. And then I want to make another general point. Sham Crown Derby smiling. Silly Millie's birthday gift. Only 5 she was then. No, wait, 4. That's why he's smiling. Millie gave it to him when she was little, and he would have been... He's 38 now, and she's 15. How is my addition and subtraction? He was 27, which means he had a moustache when he was 27. A young dad. So that's the moustache cup. Now, I said I'd pick up an interesting reference. Not all of Joyce is pinned rigidly, like a butterfly to a wall, to Homer's Odyssey. But at the moment, I'm doing, for my own purposes, a digest of the Odyssey. And I'm learning from it to watch out for certain almost standard classical tropes, weapons, vessels, animals, sacrifices, and observe how Joyce refers to them or uses them. So, apropos this week, in Book 8 of the Odyssey, there's this detail. King Alcinous, at a great feast, gives Ulysses the Wanderer a gift. Here's the Samuel Butler translation. Quote, I shall myself, says the king, give him this golden goblet, which is of exquisite workmanship, that he may be reminded of me for the rest of his life, whenever he makes a drink offering to Jove or to any of the gods. That's the moustache cup that will always remind Mr. Bloom of Millie. There's a moment in the same chapter when Ulysses cuts off a piece of the pork he's eating and sends it across the banquet hall to another guest, sends it to the bard, the teller of tales, Diamodocus. And as we well know, Mr. Bloom is himself cooking a pork kidney. See how it works? By the way, this is a digression. The chapter has a wonderful list of men's names from ancient Greece. Acronius, Ocyalus, Elatrius, Nautius, Premnius, Anchialus, Aretmius, Pontius, Proteus. Isn't it great to be alive? Isn't it great? So that's the interesting Homeric reference I mentioned. King Alcinous' cup and the moustache cup. Now, the general point that I said I wanted to make, 51 words, that's all we've had in this week's chunk of text. In a seemingly obvious piece of writing, Joyce buried such a lot, and this will get deeper and deeper as we go along. If I haven't warned you before, let me say it now. There will be weeks when, in this time frame, I'll be able to deal with no more than a few words at a time, and we've been there already, especially in Chapter 3. Why I'm saying this now is because this week, the density came in a seemingly obvious, clear piece of domestic activity and thought. And one thing also to watch out for is how some of Joyce's streams of consciousness use foreshadowing. In probably next week's podcast, I'll highlight a word, one single word, that shows Mr. Bloom's pain, his fear, his worry even. The implication being that if his wife isn't secure from this sexual predator, will his daughter go the same route? That's, a week from now. Yeah, I think it'll be in next week. I'm pretty certain. Oh, a last note for this week. I'm preparing another ebook of these podcasts. They're called Joyce, Exploring the World of Ulysses. And the first dozen or so of these podcasts has been transcribed. It's actually on sale, and it costs a mere $3.99 from ebook sources such as Amazon and the others, Barnes & Noble and Kobo and so on. And I will be here again next week. I hope you will too. Rejoice, episode 177, Breakfast in Bed. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. Mr. Bloom is in the kitchen preparing breakfast for, first, his wife Molly, upstairs in bed, and then himself in the kitchen with the cat. As he makes tea and prepares a tray and sets up the cooking of the kidney that he has bought from the butcher's, he has been glancing at the letter that his sweet daughter Milly, whom we never meet in the novel, by the way, has sent from down in the Midlands of Ireland to say thank you for the tam o' shanter that her parents sent her for her birthday. And so Mr. Bloom recollects birthdays past. This week's text from Chapter 4 of Ulysses, the segment we now call Calypso, consists of Mr. Bloom's thoughts, they're what we first encounter, and toward the end, some authorial third-person narrative. And we begin with a slight overlap from last week, just to remind you of the continuity. The tea was drawn. He filled his own moustache cup. Sham-crown Derby, smiling. Silly Milly's birthday gift. Only 5 she was then. No, wait, 4. Now here's this week's text. I gave her the amberoid necklace she broke, pushing pieces of folded brown paper in the letterbox for her. He smiled, pouring. Oh, Milly Bloom, you are my darling. You're my looking-glass from night to morning. I'd rather have you without a farthing than Katie Keogh with her ass in garden. Poor old Professor Goodwin. Dreadful old case. Still, he was a courteous old chap. Old-fashioned way he used to bow Molly off the platform. And the little mirror in his silk hat, the night Milly brought it into the parlour. Oh, look what I found in Professor Goodwin's hat. Always laughed. Sex breaking out even then. Pert little beast she was. He prodded a fork into the kidney and slapped it over, then fitted the teapot on the tray. Its hump bumped as he took it up. Everything on it, bread and butter, sugar, spoon, her cream, yes. He carried it upstairs, his thumb hooked in the teapot handle. End of excerpt. Well, yes, that warrants some breaking down. Amberoid. It was all over the place when I was a child, in necklaces, rosary beads, cheap little ornaments. I suppose we were meant to think that it was amber, but it was resin. And indeed in some local trees you could see a sticky oozing of sap that was resinous and amber-coloured, especially in ornamental trees like macrocarpa, isn't that what they're called? And the little verse, oh, Milly Bloom, you are my darling, you're my looking-glass from night to morning. I'd rather have you without a farthing than Katie Keogh with her ass in garden. Did Professor Goodwin said that? Now, this is very interesting and enjoyable. This is a Valentine, and it has a history. The point about Valentines is that one wasn't supposed to know the identity of the sender. Well, that's a fairly recent development in the history of Valentine cards, and it stems from the day when it was poor form to tell someone how you felt. And secondly, it was wrong for a young lady to make overtures to a young gentleman. So, the anonymous Valentine card could act as a kind of provocative and useful romantic tool, get some fella guessing, get some girl guessing. The original Valentine cards, of course, were open expressions of love, sometimes sent where people couldn't be together for a while. This particular one is interesting, apart from showing a little boundary difficulty that Mr. Bloom may be having with his daughter. And apropos, I promised you a word that we'd come to. Here's what's interesting. Joyce was himself the target for a Valentine not unlike this, and his biographers have catalogued it. One of his playmates in Dublin, when he was about 7 or 8, was a little girl named Eileen Vance, and her father sent little James Joyce a Valentine on Eileen's behalf. It was modelled on an old Irish ballad, and the words were, "Oh, Jimmy Joyce, you are my darling, you are my looking-glass from night till morning. I'd rather have you without one farthing than Harry Newell with his ass in garden. The trouble is, it wasn't that flattering, because Harry Newell was, according to Richard Ellman, Joyce's best biographer, an old and disquieting cripple who drove a donkey and cart. Well, Joyce's mother, May Joyce, intercepted this unwelcome piece of correspondence. But, obviously, the young James found it sometime, and, when it came to writing Ulysses, remembered it. That tradition of a slightly insulting Valentine, the irony of attraction, I remember hearing that. That was current when I was growing up. There was a local girl got one, and it went, "My dearest dear and dearest monkey, your face is like the devil's donkey. With your shovel hands and cloven feet, you stole out of hell while the devil was asleep." Oops, digression watch. Anyway, Mr. Bloom is having thoughts of his 15-year-old daughter. Thoughts that are maybe too fond. Next line, poor old Professor Goodwin. He was the accompanist for Molly's stage performances. Dreadful old case. Still, he was a courteous old chap. Something wrong, Mr. Bloom thinks, with Professor Goodwin. Yet the gentleman behaved like a gentleman to his performers. He bowed Molly off the stage when her applause had ended. Old-fashioned way he used to bow Molly off the platform. And here's another looking-glass, and the little bearer in his silk hat. The night Millie brought it into the parlour. "Oh, look what I found in Professor Goodwin's hat." Oh, we laughed. Clearly, Professor Goodwin kept a little hand mirror in his top hat to check his appearance backstage before appearing in front of an audience in order to accompany the next singer. Now, listen to this. I promised this last week. Sex breaking out even then, Mr. Bloom thinks. Pert little piece she was. There's the word I promised to highlight. Pert. Leopold Bloom should not be having these more than faintly incestuous thoughts about his daughter. Pert. It has sexual connotations. It really does. It comes from the same root as the word aperture. Aper, the French word meaning open, goes back to the 1200s. It's a very old word. It's meant to mean open, but of course down the years it became frank and then saucy. So he's using the word pert to think about his daughter. And the pornography of the day, with which Mr. Bloom was well acquainted, as we shall find out, it referred to pert young breasts. And pert was, as I say, in general a term of sexual sauciness, not what a father should be dwelling on in relation to his daughter, eh? He's definitely aware that Millie is sexually aware. Not good. Now we move into Joyce's narration. He prodded a fork into the kidney and slapped it over, then fitted the teapot on the tray. Its hump bumped as he took it up. I love that kind of detail. This must be a tin tray, because it had a bubble in the tin, and the bubble realigned itself under the weight of the teapot. As the kidney is cooking, he turns it over in the pan. He checks the breakfast tray for his wife's breakfast. This, by the way, is for a wife who's not even very nice to him, as we saw from her brusqueness a week or two ago. He checks the tray. Everything on it? Bread and butter, sugar, spoon, or cream? Yes. And so he carried it upstairs, his thumb hooked in the teapot handle, Joyce says, to stop the tea from spilling. This detail is wonderful. Playfulness between father and daughter, and gifts, and the care he takes with Molly's tray. Poor Mr. Bloom. More next week. May I just say, and I don't say it often enough, thank you for all your emails and comments. I simply can't answer them all. This is a one-man band. And the first sheet music from that band, so to speak, is an e-book, Rejoice, exploring the world of Ulysses. It consists of the first dozen or so of these podcasts transcribed, and it costs from e-book sources such as Amazon a mere $3.99. See you next week. Rejoice, episode 178, Molly and Mozart. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. In Chapter 4, otherwise known as Calypso, we have here an emerging portrait of a marriage. Mr. Bloom is down in the kitchen, preparing to bring his wife breakfast in bed, as the kidney that he went out and bought at the butcher's cooks in the pan. She, Marion, or Molly, is still half asleep, but not so half asleep that she hasn't been able to try and hide, or at least not open in front of her husband, a letter she's had in the Morning Post. And, whether through guilt, brazenness, or sheer control, she's not even nice to this mild husband. He has set the tray with her bread and teapot and has climbed the stairs to their bedroom. Here's this week's text. It's a goodish chunk. Nudging the door open with his knee, he carried the tray in and set it on the chair by the bedhead. "What a time you were," she said. She set the brasses jingling as she raised herself briskly, an elbow on the pillow. He looked calmly down on her bulk and between her large soft bubs, sloping within her nightdress like a she-goat's udder. The warmth of her couched body rose on the air, mingling with the fragrance of the tea she poured. A strip of torn envelope peeped from under the dimpled pillow. In the act of going, he stayed to straighten the bedspread. "Who was the letter from?" he asked. "Bold hand, Marion." "Oh, Boylan," she said. "He's bringing the programme." "What are you singing?" "Latchy de Ram with J.C. Doyle," she said, "and Love's Old Sweet Song." Her full lips, drinking, smiled. "Rather stale smell that incense leaves next day, like foul flower water. Would you like the window open a little?" She doubled a slice of bread into her mouth, asking, "What time is the funeral?" 11, I think," he answered. I didn't see the paper." End of this week's text. Not a lot there that isn't clear. Be grateful for small mercies, I say, given what I know is in the obscure years ahead of us. Nudging the door open with his knee, he carried the tray in and set it on the chair by the bedhead. You get the picture. You truly do. "What a time you are," she said. What is wrong with this woman? We know that Mr. Bloom didn't waste any time. He went downstairs, made tea, cut and buttered her bread, set the tray, and brought it all up. But no, that's not good enough. She wants to keep her foot on his neck. Something interesting here in the next sentence. She set the brasses jingling as she raised herself briskly, an elbow on the pillow. The brasses are ornamental quoits, rings, dancing on and decorating the head of the bed and the foot of the bed. And watch out for that jingling sound, because it can break a man's heart. Next, he looked calmly down on her bulk and between her large soft bubs, sloping within her nightdress like a she-goat's udder. This is not a skinny woman, and bubs for breasts was a forerunner of boobs. Bub, or bubby, some people will tell you, and I don't disagree, but it came from bibo, bibere, the Latin verb to drink. Note, by the way, that Mr. Bloom doesn't register any erotic feelings looking down on his wife's heavy bosom splayed within her nightdress. Keep an eye on that characterization, too. And with the next sentence, watch out for the beginnings of a device of Joyce's, the way he likes to delay things, delay the reveal. Here's the sentence. The warmth of her couched body rose on the air, mingling with the fragrance of the tea she poured. Hold that device thought. Just hold on to it. I'll be back to it in a moment. Next three sentences. A strip of torn envelope peeped from under the dimpled pillow. In the act of going, he stayed to straighten the bedspread. "Who was the letter from?" he asked. He knows now that she has opened the envelope that she tucked under her pillow. He pretends to be leaving, yet lingers and adjusts the quilt, and then he asks the fatal question that he wishes he didn't have to ask: who sent the letter? Before she answers, he remembers the insult. Bold hand, Marion. Because the letter, in not shy handwriting, was not addressed as it should have been. It should have been Mrs. Leopold Bloom. That would have been showing the appropriate respect to a married woman and her husband. But instead, the bold hand said, Mrs. Marion Bloom. And she gives him the answer that embodies the subterfuge. "Oh, Boylan," she said. He's bringing the programme. Hugh Blazes Boylan will be dropping by that afternoon with the programme of the next concert that he's promoting and in which Molly is singing, and we will be with Mr. Bloom at the hour when he knows that his wife, back at home, he's out on the streets of Dublin, at work, is entertaining Boylan in their marital bed in which she is now lying and where he has brought her breakfast. Joyce, by the way, suffered himself from an extraordinary level of sexual jealousy, and watch out for how it illuminates his entire text. And poor Mr. Bloom, who has an instinct for doing the right thing, he goes along with the subterfuge. He doesn't say, I'd better be here when he arrives, or I'll make sure to be here, or that fella had better not show his face around here. No. He says, what are you singing? And Molly answers that she's singing Naci Darem with J.C. Doyle, the duet from Don Giovanni. She's Zerlina, Doyle's Don Giovanni. And we hear it again and again in Ulysses. It's like a refrain. And she's also singing love's old sweet song, a tender song that my own untender father used to sing. J.C. Doyle is a local celebrity baritone, and a more than useful one too. And just a word about the music. Naci Darem is a seduction duet, plain and simple. The village maid wants to go with suave Don Giovanni the seducer, and she doesn't want to when he sings, Give me your hand, my dearest, Naci Darem da mano. And she answers, Vorrei or non vorrei. I'd like to and I wouldn't like to. You get the point. More troubling to Mr. Bloom, though, or should be, is the second number. Love's old sweet song. That is, it should trouble him, if Boylan means it, to have meaning with Marion Molly Bloom, because it's a song of deeper love and permanence. So to the end, when life's dim shadows fall, love will be found the sweetest song of all. Think I went off note there. Well, with either piece of music, there's no good news here for Mr. Bloom. And here comes that device that I mentioned earlier. Remember now, before he asks about the stage program, there's this observation, quote, The warmth of her couched body rose on the air, mingling with the fragrance of the tea she poured. Now we get the follow-up, several beats later. Quote, Her full lips, drinking, smiled. Rather stale smell that incense leaves next day. Like foul flower water, Joyce comes back. Several sentences later, he comes back to the human aroma arising from the bed, and Mr. Bloom gives it a name, like foul flower water, or incense, old incense. In fact, we won't know for sure what the aroma truly is. We do find out, and why it's there, until the last stages of Molly's soliloquy. So, listen out for it around the year 2031. But it's there, because Mr. Bloom then asks, would you like the window open a little? She doubled a slice of bread into her mouth, asking, What time is the funeral? 11, I think, he answered. I didn't see the paper. As you can tell, doubling the bread, Molly doesn't have entirely ladylike habits of eating. And now we're introduced to a great sub-theme in Ulysses, the funeral. The funeral is that of Paddy Dignam. It'll take up a whole chapter soon, and there will be many continued references throughout the novel. More of the same next week. Let me remind you, Rejoice, Exploring the World of Ulysses, is now an ebook by yours truly. It's essentially the first dozen or so of these podcasts transcribed, and it costs from ebook sources such as Amazon a mere $3.99. And I can promise you there will be more ebooks soon. See you next week. Rejoice, episode 179, Garters and Creek. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. So, Mr. Bloom has taken breakfast upstairs to his wife, and he's standing by the bed. She's asked him what time is the funeral to which he will later go, and he thinks that it's about 11 on this Thursday morning, the 16th of June, 1904, in Chapter 4 of Ulysses. Her mouth is now full of bread, but she wants him to do something else. And Watch out here for the coarseness of Molly Bloom. This chapter, remember, is the only time we get to see her through somebody else's eyes. Here's this week's text. Remember, they've just had the exchange about the funeral. It's where we finished last week. Following the pointing of her finger, he took up a leg of her soiled drawers from the bed. No? Then a twisted grey garter looped round a stocking, rumpled, shiny sole. No, that book. Other stocking, her petticoat. It must have fell down, she said. He felt here and there. Voglio e non vorrei. Wonder if she pronounces that right. Voglio. Not in the bed, must have slid down. He stooped and lifted the valance. The book, fallen, sprawled against the bulge of the orange-keyed chamber pot. Show here, she said. I put a mark in it. There's a word I wanted to ask you. She swallowed a draught of tea from her cup, held by knot-handle, and having wiped her fingertips smartly on the blanket, began to search the text with the hairpin till she reached the word. Met him what? He asked. Here, she said. What does that mean? He leaned downward and read near her polished thumbnail. Metempsychosis. Yes, who's he when he's at home? Metempsychosis, he said, frowning, is Greek. From the Greek. That means the transmigration of souls. Ah, rocks, she said. Tell us some plain words. End of text. We have a bunch of things here. First of all, look at the arresting characterization. Molly leaves yesterday's underwear and hose strewn in her bed. And no wonder Joyce was attacked. Soiled drawers in 1922. Ye gods! And a twisted grey garter. We see the carelessness and haste with which she undressed last night. Now she speaks when he verifies that it's not. No, the underwear that she wants. She wants that book she's been reading. He finds 2 more items of clothing, other stocking, her petticoat. This is a slovenly woman as well as a bullying shrew. And now she speaks a full sentence. It must have fell down. Note the grammar. That's ultimate characterization from a man who knew so much about the English language as James Joyce. He felt here and there. Mr. Bloom is looking for the book that Molly was reading when she fell asleep, and he puts his hands in around the bedding. And here comes a terrific little Joycean stunt. He thinks about the seduction duet Laci da Rem from Don Giovanni we had it last week, and a line of it comes into his mind. Voglio e non vorrei. And he asks himself, wonder if she pronounces that right. Voglio. Well now, that is not the line from the opera. The line is vorrei e non vorrei. We had it last week too. Listen to the shading of meaning and ideas here. Vorrei e non vorrei means I'd like to and I wouldn't like to. But if it were really voglio e non vorrei, voglio is a blunt I want to, but I wouldn't like to. I want to. Meaning that Leopold Bloom is really hurt by Molly's infidelity, and the misremembering seems to suggest that he believes unconsciously she truly wants Boylan in their bed. That there's no seemly hesitation, no wifely modesty on her part, that she's not being led astray, as any man in his situation would prefer to believe, that she actually wants to be unfaithful. Poor guy. And he makes the same mistake with Voglio later on too, the same misquoting. What's next? Yes, he goes on searching, thinking to himself, not in the bed, must have slid down. He stooped and lifted the valance. The book, fallen, sprawled against the bulge of the orange-keyed chamber pot. There's a little joke going on here, and a little spread of reference. Orange-keyed is an actual design. You'll know it without necessarily knowing that you know it. It's as Greek as it gets. It looks like a series of unfinished squares or rectangles made into a square chain. And just as the Celtic whorl is the tendril of the honeysuckle, pushed almost to infinity, the orange key design is probably taken from a bird's eye view of a maze In this case, probably the labyrinth of Knossos in the Greek legend of the Minotaur. Yes, imagine looking down on a maze with all its interlocking chambers and corridors. Now, disconnect them and open them out into a long continued line while keeping the shape of each chamber. Then you get orange keyed. That's what it looks like. But is there a joke in here? Is there another meaning? Suppose the chamber pot isn't empty. I'm being delicate. Might there be an orange-colored liquid inside? You never know with Joyce. That's why I'm here. Remember, this is the man who called a collection of his poems chamber music, because of the sound he had in mind. A chamber pot sound. So, Mr. Bloom retrieves the book. "Show here," she said. "I put a mark in it. There's a word I wanted to ask you." She swallowed a draught of tea from her cup held by Not Handle, and having wiped her fingertips smartly on the blanket, began to search the text with the hairpin till she reached the word she was looking for. Don't you love Not Handle? A neologism, perfectly made, coined for the circumstance. And Joyce added it. It's not in the original manuscript. And again we see that this is no lady. She grips her teacup by the bowl, not the handle, and she wipes her bread and buttery fingers on the quilt, on the bedding, on the blanket. For a moment there I was puzzled by the hairpin. The hairpin. And the definite article, by the way, is also in the manuscript. He doesn't mention a hairpin until now, does he? No, he doesn't. Actually, it's perfectly logical, though, to say the hairpin if you've already had "I put a mark in it," because a hairpin was a bookmark. Duh. Now, the word she has reached, the word she's asking him about, the word she doesn't understand, is defeating her. And obviously Mr. Bloom is reading it, or trying to, as she points it out with her polished fingernail, because he says, "Met him what?" And she says, "Here," pointing it to him. "What does that mean?" And he leans down near her and reads aloud the word that's near her polished thumbnail. "Metempsychosis." And Molly says, "Yes, who's he when he's at home?" And her husband answers, "Metempsychosis," and tells her, "is from the Greek, and it means the transmigration of souls." Too much for Molly, who answers, "Oh, rocks, tell us in plain words." In other words, stop using jawbreakers. Stop showing you're intelligent. You know, aside from her hectoring of him, this passage is delicious. There's a lovely joke running here. If you were to apply a true synecdoche here, and take the part to suggest or indicate the entire, take the word to direct us to the kind of book Molly was reading, we'd go horribly wrong. Were we to assume that she was reading a book about the transmigration of souls, we would be so far off the mark. I mean, suppose we were to believe that she was in some way or other some kind of highbrow. Oh, whoops. The book she was reading was unlikely, I can tell you, to have such a big, jaw-breaking word in it, and indeed it didn't, because, wait for it, it was called Ruby, the Pride of the Ring, a novel about the life of a circus girl, complete with brutality and monstrous, tyrannical ringmasters and whips and stuff. Not much room there for discussions of the soul, the transmigration of souls, the reincarnation, as you shall hear, because we'll have all that next week. And parting thought, don't forget you can buy the first dozen or so of these podcasts transcribed in an ebook name of Rejoice, Exploring the World of Ulysses, and it costs, from online sources such as Amazon, a mere, not breaking the bank, $3.99. Come back next week, because I will too. Rejoice, episode 180A, Hitting a Homer. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. It's Baker's Dozen time again, the little extra bonus I offer you for being loyal followers. It takes the form of an essay, which, as you know, I put up here after every 12th podcast. And I use it to think aloud or zero in on some aspect of Joyce or Ulysses that I don't address in detail within the confines of the weekly transmission. This time, I want to have a look at Homer. And no, I don't mean Homer Simpson, though God knows I'm sure he could well crop up in the works of some future son of James Joyce megawork. Why am I doing this? Because, as you probably know, but it's always pleasant to repeat, Joyce stretched Ulysses across the frame of Homer's Odyssey, with Stephen as Telemachus, Mr. Bloom as Odysseus, or Ulysses as the Romans called him, and Molly Bloom as Penelope. Multiple ironies abound at Mr. Joyce's hand, great and small, and that, for me, is a huge part of the delight in reading Ulysses and in doing this weekly deconstruction exercise. And I have another reason for this particular essay. Few of the classical writers, in fact none of the classical writers, moves me the way Homer does. He thrills me. He touches my heart. He stimulates my imagination. I've spent many days in the hills of Greece wondering if I'm walking in his footsteps, and those have been great days, and will be again. So here goes. First of all, when we ask the who, when, what, where, how, and even why of Homer, we immediately run into problems, because there has long been some disagreement as to the answers to many of these questions. Who he was raises the first difficulty. For centuries, more than a few scholars have insisted that he was not a lone singular he, that he was a they. The Iliad and the Odyssey, some good and powerful minds have argued, they were the work of many poets, and one day it was all gathered up and assembled into a unified pair of textual works intended to be the collective voice of classical Greece. I have my doubts about that, the same way as I have my even stronger doubts about the arguments that William Shakespeare's works were written by the Earl of Oxford. And, the time differences notwithstanding, Shakespeare being more recent, my doubts come from not dissimilar sources. First, and this is more facile and, in a sense, almost frivolous, never underestimate the power of creative envy. In Shakespeare's case, you still, to this day, get theatre directors who cut some of the most beautiful parts of his text and then claim pressure of time. In Shakespeare's own day, it must have been galling on a number of levels, including class distinction and snobbery, for educated aristocrats to see these glorious plays come from the son of a glover and a moneylender, a boy who grew up in a country town, a strolling player, for God's sake. Likewise, down the centuries before Christ and just after, if you were a jobbing journeyman poet in Greece, you mightn't like the fact that there had been somebody out on the road before you who was a lot better and a lot more famous. Well, that's the facile argument. I toss it in as much for entertainment as anything else. The other reasons are more interesting. For me, the Earl of Oxford as Shakespeare and the composite Homer, those ideas don't work because of the unification and consistency of tone. This is truer of Shakespeare and easier to fight about because he was so recent. In the case of Homer, some modification is necessary. I've only read small portions of the Odyssey in the Greek. I'm about to brush up more fully and do more of it. But I've also read a number of different translations, and up to a point, it's always the cohesive same. For slightly more than half of the text, it's always like reading somebody's novel, Updike or E.M. Forster or Gabriel Garcia Marquez, whom I'm reading at the moment, also, of course, translated into English. And then, about 60% of the way in, the Odyssey mutates a little. It becomes like reading a slightly different novel, but by the same person. So here's my best stab at it. That it was a single author, perhaps about 9 or 10 centuries before the time of Christ. That the Odyssey began life as a series of spoken episodes, stories told in Greek households. The chapters are notably episode length if you look at them. And that they were, in his lifetime, written down by Homer himself or his amanuensis, his clerk. And then, over the early centuries after Homer's death, they were preserved by people who may have adjusted the text from time to time, as they themselves went from house to house telling the tales of Homer. I'm certain, though, that the chapters, the episodes in the Odyssey were originally told, narrated stories in the oral tradition of spoken narrative, and then later, as they became recognized as a national literature, they were told by rhapsodes, professional storytellers, wandering speech troubadours. And the stories in the Odyssey still work like that. And each episode, told aloud, would often last around, I'd say, an hour or under. Now, whether Homer was even Greek at all, that has also been questioned. The rhythm of the stories and the repetitive phrases does suggest a rhapsode, as in rhapsody, a bard figure, who may even have recited them, performed them in a dramatic fashion. He doesn't, though, have to have come from Greece. For dramatic and linguistic reasons, I like one idea, that he wasn't Greek, that he was from the ancient city of Babylon, not far from today's Baghdad, that he was a poet who was taken prisoner in a war and was therefore a hostage, which is what the name Omeros means in some derivations. There are even theories that the Odyssey was written by an Italian girl. Now, you do understand that I am skimming the surface of one of literature's oldest and longest-running discussions. Dozens of books have been written on this matter, many, if not most, by considerable scholars. I'm just putting it out there for you to consider further as a matter of your own enjoyment. So, let me just toss in a final note as we move on. Another possible variation spur of the word Omeros is that it means blindness, and so Homer was discussed as a blind, wandering poet, perhaps not even Greek. And Joyce warmed to this fact and felt a kinship because he, like Homer, had considerable difficulties with his eyesight. And, believe you me, that's an understatement. But we'll get to that another day. So much for Homer and who he might have been, and to some extent when. In fact, the when has also been debated, and by the writers we think of as classical too, and since they were closer to him in time, and therefore more likely to have been the recipient of word of mouth that was more accurately handed down, there were fewer centuries to tamper with it. I take their word for it when they give him a greater age. Some go back as far as 1200 BC. That's a greater age than those who think of him as comparatively recent, that is to say the 6th or 5th century before the Christian era, or BCE as we must call it nowadays. As to what he wrote, as to what Homer wrote, the Odyssey, which is all I'm dealing with here, is a long poem, 12,000 lines. 12,000 lines, full of character and adventure. It visits multiple islands and territories. Its protagonists have many and varied adventures and experiences, amid a certain amount of suspense. Literature now sees it as the prototype of the genre called the quest. Will the son who has set out from home find his father? That's Stephen Dedalus finding Leopold Bloom. Will the warrior find his way home? Mr. Bloom does. Will the faithful wife, while her husband is away, succumb to the temptations of the suitors who call to her door? Well, there's Molly Bloom up to handkerchief with blazes boiling, while her husband is wandering around Dublin. As the fun of Joyce's Ulysses is, much of the fun of Joyce's Ulysses, no, some of the fun of Joyce's Ulysses is that it takes many of those Homeric passages and models and translates their epic literary existence into tiny and rather shabby Dublin experiences, and it also compresses those experiences of several years, maybe centuries, into, would you believe, 18 hours of a summer day. It works. And it especially works when Joyce doesn't over-egg the pudding, when he touches the connection ever so lightly, and even somewhat obscurely. And then you find it, and you at least smile. And I hope to bring you a lot of those smiles over the years. Eumaeus, for instance, the third last chapter. In the Odyssey, they're in a swineherd's hut. In Ulysses, it's a cabman's shelter on a Dublin street. The question of where? There's great stuff that goes with that too. I have this fond dream that one day I will trace the core journey of Homer's Odyssey. I've already done it in Joyce's Dublin, rather gently, and focusing only on principal features, for a book that I called James Joyce's Odyssey, published 30 years ago, A Guide to the Dublin of Ulysses. To trace Homer would be a different matter, not least because, again, debate roils about its precise locations, if they ever existed. Nor does it matter to me if it was all in the mind, if the places never were. I still want to test whether Odysseus did go or could have gone to Sicily or the Black Sea or Malta, as well as Crete, Cyprus, Albania, and Corfu. What matters is how alive those places feel to the events and locations in Homer. I tell you, it's not a little staggering to walk down a village street in, say, Crete or Cyprus, and hear a mother calling to her young son to get him in for dinner, "Homeros! Homeros!" I'm probably most interested in the how and the why of the Odyssey. How did the material build, and why did it exist in the first place? This, for me, is where the delight, already established, turns into magic. Magic. For many years, I've longed for, and I think I've said it here, I've longed for the dictionary of the dictionary. By this I mean, when we consult a dictionary and find a definition of a word, and the citation shows when and where that word first appeared, and how it was used, thereby clarifying the definition, what's the root of the root? That's my question. That's my, if you like, quest. Example. Suppose it comes from Latin. Let's take the word manuscript, an everyday word for me and for most of us. I know, you know, we all know that it comes from two Latin words, manus, meaning hand, and scribo, meaning to write. But what was the root of manus? And what was the root of scribe? Scribo. See what I mean? And see how that could take you back deeper and deeper into antiquity, until, eventually, I suppose, you'd arrive at pure onomatopoeia. It's a fanciful theory, but only in part. Like historical reparation should do, you'd make a cut-off point so that you didn't go nuts. So likewise, where did Homer's stories come from? We know that the monks in Ireland, newly literate under the tutelage of St. Patrick's evangelists, we know they wrote down the legends they'd heard around their boyhood fireplaces, legends that had come down by word of mouth and were old, old, old. Likewise, may we not say Homer? And if we accept that, we have answered the how. Stories heard here, there, and everywhere, and passed down in families. Now, the why. And here I'm going to make a naked speculation, and there's not much of a way of proving me right or wrong. Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that Homer was a single individual and did walk through Greece and was close to the 12th century before the Christian era. And suppose he was telling the tales that he had heard as a boy, and that they were similar in corresponding antiquity to the Irish legends, that they had existed for several centuries before they were written down, or before Homer knew them. Add one more ingredient in the case of Homer. Suppose he was a hostage from Babylon, this fellow Homeros, and suppose he did arrive in Greece a captive, but fully loaded like some great ancient hard disk with all this material. That would mean, and this is where the thrill is, that would mean that the Odyssey, which James Joyce transposed, so to speak, into a 20th century Dublin day, was constructed from stories that came from the deep old deserts and cities and oases of Persia and Mesopotamia and the Asia Minor of antiquity, farmers' tales and merchants' tales and housewives' tales and warriors' tales and travellers' tales. Literature isn't confined by clocks, calendars, or centuries. We're talking about wonderful, aged, interesting stories that we still relish after a long, long passage of time. What a life we can live when we want to. That's my Baker's Dozen, back with the usual podcast number 181, I believe. Yes, it's 181. This is 180A. Next Wednesday morning. And don't forget, Joyce, Exploring the World of Ulysses, is now in its first ebook stage. The first dozen or so of these podcasts, Baker's Dozen actually, transcribed, and from ebook sources such as Amazon and all the others on the internet. It costs a mere $3.99, cheap at the price. Rejoice! Episode 180, Circus Lives. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. We're in the bedroom of Leopold and Molly Bloom, where we shall not be again for many years. Molly is enjoying the breakfast that her attentive husband has brought upstairs. He has also brought her the mail, which contained a letter from her lover, a letter she tried to conceal. She is not as nice to him as she should be. And now he has searched for and found the book she has dropped, and is attempting to explain to her the meaning of a word that she can neither pronounce nor understand. Now, read on, so to speak. Here's this week's excerpt from Ulysses. He smiled, glancing askance at her mocking eyes. The same young eyes, the first night after the charades, Dolphin's Barn. He turned over the smudged pages. Ruby, the pride of the ring. Hello. Illustration. Fierce Italian with carriage whip. Must be Ruby, pride of the on the floor, naked. Sheet kindly lent. The monster, Maffei, desisted and flung his victim from him with an oath. Cruelty behind it all. Doped animals. Trapeze at Hengler's had to look the other way. Mob gaping. Break your neck and we'll break our sides. Families of them. Bone them young so they metempsychosis. That we live after death, our souls. That a man's soul after he dies. Dignum soul. The first point I want to make here is that this is considerably different from Joyce's manuscript in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. He added 14 little sentences and phrases, all the stuff about Hengler's and the circus, for example. After the words mocking eyes, he had the words originally young still, now it's the same young eyes. He also called the book that Molly was reading by its original title. It was Ruby, A Tale of Circus Life, and he added all the stuff about Signora Maffei and the monster and desist, etc. My guess is that Joyce sent to Dublin for the book, or found it somewhere, or maybe Nora had read it. Despite his earnest attempts to explain the word metempsychosis, which, as I told you last week, isn't in the book anyway. Despite his attempts to teach her, Molly Bloom is contemptuous of her husband, as we often are of people we treat badly. Yet, Mr. Bloom smiled, glancing askance at her mocking eyes. And he recalls when he first met her, after some kind of charades party. They met over in a western suburb of Dublin where Molly lived, a place called Dolphin's Barn. Now, this is interesting. In the year 1900, that's 4 years before the year in which Joyce set Ulysses, 1900, a Jewish cemetery was opened in Dolphin's Barn. Originally named, I'm just remembering this, after a family called Dolphin, and the original spelling was Dolphyn's, Dolphin's Barn. I wonder if there were Jewish immigrants into Dublin. Anyway, they opened a Jewish cemetery there in the year 1900. So, is there a hint, a Joycean hint, that when he met Molly, Mr. Bloom was, metaphorically speaking, digging his own grave? Her mocking eyes. The same young eyes the first night after the charades, Dolphin's Barn. Yeah. I wonder if that's it. Now, in the added material, Mr. Bloom looks at the book in more detail. He turned over the smudged pages. Ruby, the pride of the ring. Hello. Illustration. Molly's taste in literature is not what you'd call edifying. It tends to the lurid, pulp fiction, penny dreadfuls, dime novels. We learn from Mr. Bloom's thoughts what the illustration looked like. Fierce Italian with carriage whip. Must be Ruby, pride of the on the floor naked. Sheet kindly lent. He hasn't got that quite right. There is an actual illustration taken from Ruby, a novel founded on the life of a circus girl by Amy Reed. In fact, the book is still available, as is another of Amy Reed's masterpieces, the 1892 gem, Slaves of the Sawdust. Amy Reed was a kind of writing evangelist, taking her cue from Charles Dickens's novels, protesting the conditions of children being forced to work or being orphans in appalling conditions, Ms. Reed wrote 2 novels about the cruelty of circus life to children who were often indentured servants, that's to say, slaves to the circus. And she was so zealous on this topic that circus folk used to follow her wherever she spoke and harass and heckle her. Now, the illustration of which Mr. Bloom is looking in Ruby, Pride of the Ring, I'm looking at it now. It was done, that's the title, by the way, to which Joyce changed it. He changed it from Ruby, a novel founded in the life of a circus girl, to Ruby, Pride of the Ring. The illustration was done by a man called Talbot Hughes. He was a young man in his early 20s when he did it, and he might not have wanted later on to be reminded of it because he went on to become a distinguished painter. And indeed, the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia, where Joyce's manuscript of Ulysses, I'm happy to say, sleeps peacefully every night, they mounted an exhibition of Talbot Hughes 25 years ago. In this picture, the picture's on chapter 21, there is indeed a girl cowering on the floor. Despite Mr. Bloom was wishful thinking, she's not naked. Fierce Italian with carriage whip. Must be Ruby, Pride of the on the floor naked, sheet kindly lent. There's a little dig in there at the hymn, lead kindly light, sheet kindly lent. She's clutching the sheet modestly to her well-concealed bosom. Her shoulders are bare, but that's all. That's all that's bare. Even more wishful thinking on Mr. Bloom's part, the man towering over her. He's wearing a frock coat, a waistcoat, a cravat, striped pants, a mustache. He's not carrying a whip. He's brandishing a stout riding crop or longish swagger stick. There's an armchair in the background, a small Grecian urn on the mantelpiece, and clearly we're invited to believe that either the girl has been thrown to the ground or she's down there begging not to be thrashed. And yet, is there a kind of askance glint in her eye that's saying, when I get up from this floor, I'm going to deck you? No? No. Well, it's a nice thought. There is a caption. The monster desisted and threw his victim from him with an oath. That'll give you the general idea. The monster was trying to have his way with the innocent maiden, and she persuaded him otherwise, and he cast her aside in disgust, or else he was beating her, and stopped. Indeed, Joyce took quite a few liberties with this one. It's not even Ruby on the floor. It's her friend Victoria Melton, another rider in the circus, similarly badly treated. In fact, in the book she's killed, I think. Joyce also invented the name Maffei. In the novel, the villain is Signor Enrico, Italian certainly, but Joyce tries to make him almost a mafioso. And then we have Mr. Bloom's thoughts on the circus in general. Cruelty behind it all, doped animals, and a news item, so to speak. Trapeze and hanglers had to look the other way. Mob gaping. Break your neck and we'll break our sides. Joyce's time was a great era for the circus. Here, Mr. Bloom may be conflating the tension he feels looking up at the trapeze in a circus. He may be conflating it with old news of an accident at the famous Hengler Circus. The Henglers were a great Victorian circus family in England. A Hengler, by the way, founded the London Palladium, I think. Anyway, on the 23rd of October, 1872, a spectator gallery collapsed at a Hengler's performance in Sheffield, and several people were hurt, including an acrobat, Miss Emery, who, said the reports, was shaken and crushed. The mob evidently gaped, but the show went on, because, says tradition, we go to the circus to see the acrobats fall. And Mr. Bloom dwells for a moment on another circus tradition, especially in trapeze artistes and acrobats. Families of them. Born them young, so they. Metempsychosis. 2 things here. Mr. Bloom is responding to an old trope that acrobats, and there were, and are families of them for generations, families of acrobats, used to remove their children's key bones at birth to make them more flexible. And Joyce is showing how the brain then elides into things, because the word metempsychosis comes back into Mr. Bloom's mind in the middle of a thought. And he goes with that next thought, that we live after death, our souls, that a man's soul after he dies, dignum soul, their will, as we already know, be a funeral of Paddy Dignam. Incidentally, what was he playing at? What's Joyce playing at here? With the misspelling of metempsychosis. He changed it in that last reference from M-E-T-E to M-E-T-A. It's in the Gabler edition and it's in the manuscript. Is he giving us a clue to Molly's somewhat bipolar personality? Has he met psychosis? Or is the psychosis meta, as in metabolism or metamorphosis? I have a hunch that he might have been playing and maybe didn't finish the thought. By the way, Joyce's new title for the book Molly is reading, Ruby, Pride of the Ring, there's a dirty little joke in there. The ring is a euphemism for sexual intercourse, as in, did you get your ring last night? Equaling, did you get laid? I often heard it in Dublin, at work and elsewhere. And by the way, Mr. Bloom, being Jewish, would have known all about the idea of reincarnation. It was much discussed, especially among Hasidic Jews. So that's it for this week. Rather complicated, Life of the Circus. Don't forget, read Joyce, Exploring the World of Ulysses. I have that now out as an ebook. It comprises the first dozen or so of these podcasts transcribed, and from ebook sources such as Amazon and Kobo and Barnes & Noble on the internet. It's a mere trifle at $3.99. Join me again here next week.